The night was warm, but the air around Keanu felt heavy. Like a weight pressing on his chest, he had just left another glittering. Hollywood event lights, flashing cameras shouting his name, voices calling out questions about his next movie and his SSC, and his next leading lady. He smiled, politely waved and gave short answers, but his heart wasn't in it. The red carpets, the endless interviews, the polished smiles, it all felt so far away from the life he wanted. The car ride home was silent. The city lights blurring outside the window. His driver spoke once, asking if he wanted to stop anywhere. Keanu shook his head. He just wanted to be home, far from the noise, far from the endless expectation of being someone he no longer recognized, one he walked into. His apartment, the quiet, greeted him like an old friend here. There were no flashing cameras, no screaming crowds, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of coffee from earlier in the day. He set down his keys and looked at the table. There was a small envelope waiting for him, handwritten in the neat looping script he knew so well. Alexandra Grant opened it slowly. Her letters were never long, but they always carried weight. This one simply said, "I know tonight was important for you, but if you need air, come to the studio. I'll be here painting like always. No cameras, no noise, just quiet." Keanu stared at the note for a long time, something inside him shifting. Alexandra had never been part of the Hollywood circle. She didn't dress for attention. She didn't chase headlines. She lived in her own world of colors and canvases, and somehow that world always had a place for him, even when he wasn't sure where he belonged. Thought back to the night they first met, not at a party, not through mutual celebrity friends, but at a small charity book fair. She had been helping set up a table of poetry books. He noticed her not because she was loud or demanding, but because she was completely at ease in the crowd, like she was in no rush to be anywhere else. He had offered to help carry a heavy box, and she smiled in a way that felt like the world slowing down just for a moment. Then she had been his anchor in ways she didn't even know. She never asked about movie deals or box office numbers. Instead, she asked about the books he was reading, about the music that made him pause in the middle of the day. She treated him like a person, not a star, and it was something he hadn't realized he was starving for until she gave it freely. But tonight felt different. The event he had just attended wasn't just another Hollywood night. It had been filled with whispers and offers, producers talking about pairing him with a young rising actress for a publicity romance to help sell a new film. They had even hinted about how this could boost his career, make him more marketable for years to come, and all he had to do was play a long smile for the cameras and be seen in the right places with the right people. He knew what that meant. They wanted him to become an image, not a man they wanted to replace. The quiet truth of his life with a perfect, glossy version that the public would eat up, and Alexandra had no place in that version. Took a deep breath, grabbed his motorcycle helmet and headed back out. The city was still buzzing, but his mind was already quiet, focused on one thing. When he reached her studio, the lights were on. He could see her moving inside the walls lined with unfinished paintings. She was bent over a canvas, her hair pulled back, streaks of paint on her hand. Stood there for a moment, just watching her through the glass door. It struck him how different her world was from the one he had just left in here. There were no scripts, no manufactured moments. Everything was real, even the mess, even the silence. When she finally looked up and saw him, her face softened into a smile. "You look tired," she said. He stepped inside, and without thinking, he said, "I think I'm done with all of it, Alexandra." "All of what?" she asked softly. "All of Hollywood glamour," he replied. "Because if it means losing you, it's not worth either." Eyes searched his face for a long moment, as if she was trying to see the truth in his words. Then she sat down her brush and simply said, "Then let's start painting something new." Keanu felt something break open in his chest, not in pain, but in relief. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this tonight. He chose her. Asterisk. The studio smelled faintly of turpentine and dried flowers, the kind of scent that seemed to wrap itself around him, pulling him deeper into Alexandra's world. Keanu stood there, still catching his breath from the ride. The sound of the city outside faded until it felt like the only things that existed were the soft hum of her small desk lamp and the rhythmic strokes of her paintbrush. Alexandra Didn't press him for details. She didn't ask what happened at the event. She simply moved aside, making space for him. The table where paints were scattered across an old cloth-covered surface. A canvas sat in the center half, finished full of colors that seemed to shift between light and shadow as you looked at them. Keanu took the seat next to her, letting the silence grow between them after a few minutes. She said quietly, "You've been carrying this decision for longer than tonight. Haven't you?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the paint palette. "I've been thinking about it for months. Every event. Fake smile every headline that isn't true. It feels like I'm disappearing a little more each times." Picked up a small brush and added a line of pale blue to the corner of the canvas. "In disappearing into the work like she always did when she was thinking," maybe she said softly, "it's not about disappearing, maybe it's about letting go of the parts that were never really yaw or words settled deep inside him because she was right. He had spent so much of his life being shaped by what the industry wanted that sometimes he forgot what he wanted, but standing here beside her, the answer felt clear. It wasn't the lights or the fame or the carefully staged moments. It was the quiet, it was the honesty, it was Thistle. He knew the decision wouldn't be as simple as walking away. The phone calls would come, the contracts, the interviews, the questions from people who thought they knew what was best for him, and then there were the people who would try to make Alexandra feel small, who would twist her image to fit the narrative they wanted. He had seen it happen before to others, and the thought of it happening to her made his hands clench. Must have sensed his worry because she reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. "I've never needed your name in lights, Keanu, and I don't need the world to approve of me. If you're beside me, that's enough." Looked at her fully then, and saw no fear in her eyes, only steadiness, the kind of strength that wasn't loud but unshakable. And in that moment, he realized something important. It wasn't Hollywood. He had to walk away from it, was the version of himself that had been built to please it. Before he could say more, her phone buzzed. On the table, she glanced at it, then her brows pulled together slightly. He noticed, and asked, "What is it?" She hesitated just a second too long before answering. "Nothing important," but Keanu knew her well enough to see when something was wrong still. He didn't push it, not yet. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Maybe tomorrow we go somewhere, no cameras, no questions. Somewhere quiet where we can just breathe." Ish smiled a little, but the look in her eyes stayed thoughtful and distant. As if part of her mind was somewhere else. Keanu didn't know then that the message she had just received would pull them both into a different kind of spotlight, one neither of them had prepared for. The morning light streamed through the curtains in soft golden ribbons, but Keanu's mind was far from calm. He had barely slept after leaving Alexandra's studio, his thoughts circling around her expression. When she looked at that message, the way her fingers lingered on the phone just a little too long before she set it down mid-morning. He decided to call her. Her voice was warm, but he could hear the slight edge beneath it. She told him she was already at the studio working on a new piece. He offered to bring coffee and something to eat. She hesitated before agreeing. He arrived. The door was locked, which was unusual for her. During the day he knocked, and after a pause, she opened it. Her hair was tied back loosely, but he noticed. Her hands were trembling slightly. She stepped aside, letting him in, her eyes flicking toward the street before closing the door behind him. Set the coffee and pastries on the table and asked directly, "Alexandra, what was on that message last night?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her brush and pretended to work, but he could see her strokes were distracted and uneven. Finally, she set the brush down and said, "It was from someone I don't know. They used no name, just wrote, 'We should meet about KeanuReeves.'" Keanu felt a rush of heat in his chest. "Who would send you that?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but they included a location and time." Tanith walked to the window, scanning the street below. The world outside seemed normal, but the message was anything but normal. This wasn't gossip. This was personal and targeted. Alexandra stepped closer, her voice low. "Do you think it's someone from your past?" Nodded slowly. "I think so. The last few years I've kept my life quiet, but before that there were deals I walked away from, offers I turned down, people who didn't take it well. Some of them know things about me the public doesn't, and they might see you as a way to get to mesh." Crossed her arms, leaning against the table. "What do you want to do? Ignore it or go?" Keanu met her gaze, his voice steady. "If I ignore it, they might keep reaching out, or worse, show up here. If I go, I can control the situation at least a little." Her eyes narrowed. then I'm going. With you, Keanu shook his head. No, it could be dangerous. She didn't flinch maybe, but this is my life too now, and if someone thinks they can scare me. The wrong wanted to argue, but he knew she wasn't the kind of person to stay behind. While someone else faced the storm, so he simply said, then we go together, but we're careful as. Evening fell, they drove toward the meeting place. Small old cafe at the edge of the city. It was nearly empty when they arrived. Only a single man sitting. In the back corner, his eyes tracking them as they entered, Keanu recognized him instantly, a face from years ago. Tied to a decision he had tried to forget, man leaned forward and spoke quietly. You've made a lot of enemies, Keanu, and now they know who she is. If you want to keep her safe, you'll hear me out. Keanu's jaw tightened as he took a seat across from the man. Alexandra slid in beside him, her posture calm but her eyes sharp. The man's gaze flicked to her, then back to Keanu. As if measuring how much she already knew, his voice was low but carried an edge. You walked away from a deal that cost some very powerful people a lot of money, Keanu. You didn't just disappear, you embarrassed them and people like that.
Ow.
Forget, and now they think the easiest way to hurt you is through her. Alexandra didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward and asked directly. What do they want? The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. They want you to finish what you started years ago, or pay them back double with interest, and they don't mean in cash. Keanu's fingers curled against the table. He had known walking away all those years ago wouldn't be the end of it, but he had hoped the distance, time and silence would be enough. Apparently, he was wrong. What's the alternative? He asked. The man glanced toward the window as if making sure no one was listening. The alternative is to leave the country, disappear completely, but they'd still look for you, and as long as they think Alexandra knows anything, she'll be a target. Alexandra's voice was steady. What exactly do they think I know? The man shrugged. Enough to make you dangerous to them? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything doesn't matter. What matters is they've decided you're part of the game. Now silence that followed was heavy. Keanu could feel her hand brushing his under the table, grounding him, keeping him from slipping into the anger that was starting to rise in his chest. Finally, Keanu said, if I meet them on their terms, they'll try to trap me, and if I run, they'll chase harder. The man nodded. Exactly. Which is why you have to turn it on them. Catch them before they can catch you. Alexandra's eyes met Keanu's, and in that moment, he knew she wasn't going to step back from this. She was already in it with him, whether he liked it or not. She spoke quietly. Tell us where they'll be. Man leaned back, studying them for a long moment before sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. It had an address and a date: tomorrow night, no later than 9 o'clock. He said as they left the cafe. Keanu could feel the weight of what was coming. The quiet of the streets felt almost deceptive. Alexandra walked beside him, her hand brushing his as they reached the motorcycle. She looked at him and said, this isn't just about surviving, is it? He shook his head. No, it's about ending it for good. The next day moved slowly, every hour, stretching with the weight of what was ahead. Keanu tried to keep his mind clear, but every quiet moment pulled him back into the choices he had made years ago, choices that had seemed right at the time, but carried shadows he could never fully outrun. Alexandra spent the morning in her studio, but Keanu noticed she wasn't painting much. Instead, she was sorting through boxes of old sketches and photographs. Her movements careful, deliberate, like someone putting their life in order. He knew she was preparing for more than just a meeting. She was preparing for the unknown. Late afternoon, they sat together at his kitchen table, the folded paper from the night before lying between them. About it much since leaving the cafe, but now the time for silence was gone. Alexandra traced her finger over the address and said we should arrive early, watch from a distance before we go in. Keanu nodded. It was a good plan, the kind of thinking that made him both proud and deeply worried for her. Suspicious night they rode together through streets washed in the orange glow of streetlights. The address led them to a warehouse near the outskirts of the city. The building was old, the windows dark, the area around it strangely quiet. Keanu parked the motorcycle 2 blocks away. They approached on foot, sticking to the shadows from their vantage point behind a stack of shipping crates. They watched the building. A single dim light glowed above the entrance. After several minutes, a black car pulled up. 2 men stepped out, both dressed in dark suits. Their movements precise and watchful, they disappeared inside. Without speaking, Glextra's voice was barely a whisper. You know this. Could be a trap. He gave a faint smile. I'm counting on it. She looked at him sharply, and he added, because if they think they've already won, they might make mistakes. Thee waited until the street was empty again before moving toward the entrance. The door was unlocked, the inside air thick with dust, and the faint scent of oil from long abandoned machinery. Their footsteps echoed as they stepped deeper into the warehouse sign. The center of the space, a table had been set up, and around it sat 3 people, none of whom Keanu recognized, but he could feel their eyes on him with the cold weight of calculation. The man in the middle spoke first, his tone calm, but sharp. You finally decided to stop hiding. Keanu stayed standing. Alexandra beside him. What do you want? The man gestured to the chair opposite him. Sit, and we'll talk. A canoe didn't move. I'll stand. The man's expression didn't change. You owe us, and you know why we're here tonight is your chance to make it right. And if I don't, Keanu asked. The man's voice dropped. Then she leaves here. In a way you won't lick. Keanu's pulse quickened, but his face stayed calm. Alexandra's hand brushed his, subtly steadying him. He took a slow breath and said, then, I guess we should be honest with each other, because the only reason I'm here is to make sure you never threaten her again. Man's eyes narrowed as the room shifted from negotiation to something far more dangerous. The room went still after Keanu's words. The 3 at the table exchanged glances, but the man in the middle didn't blink. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice a low, steady hum. You talk like a man who's ready to end this, Keanu, but endings come at a cost. Keanu's eyes never left his. The cost is mine to pay, not hers. Alexandra stood beside him, silent but unshaken. The man glanced at her briefly, then back to Keanu. You were trusted once, and you broke that trust. The people I represent do not forgive easily. Keanu took a slow step closer, his voice calm but cutting. You talk about trust, but you're the ones who built everything on lies. You wanted me to do something that would have destroyed lives, and when I walked away, you decided I was the problem of. The other men at the table shifted in his seat as if ready to move, but the man in the middle lifted a hand, stopping him. Fine. He said then, prove you're not the problem. Give us the information you've been holding since the day you disappeared. Alexandra looked at Keanu, her eyes questioning. He didn't look back at her. Instead, he said, I destroyed it years ago. It's gone. The man's smile was thin. Then you're of no use to us. Canoe men in dark suits emerged from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, moving toward them. Alexandra tensed, but Keanu stepped in front of her, his voice sharp. Stop right there, because if you touch her, I make sure every single person who ever worked with you is exposeteth. Man at the table tilted his head. You're bluffing. Keanu pulled a small flash drive from his jacket and placed it on the table. I'm not bluffing. Copies exist, and if anything happens to her, they go public. Silence that followed was thick. One of the suited men glanced at the man in the middle, waiting for an order. The man's jaw tightened, but after a long moment, he leaned back and said, You have a week to disappear, both of you. If we see you again, we won't talk. Keanu took Alexandra's hand and led her toward the exit, their steps steady, though every muscle in his body was wound tight. They didn't speak until they were back on the motorcycle, the night air cool against their faces as they sped away from the warehouse. When they finally reached her studio, she turned to him. You were telling the truth about the copies, weren't? Keanu gave a faint, tired smile. Maybe not, but they'll believe I was, and that's enough. Shh. Stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, You could have given them what they wanted and ended this for yourself, but you didn't. You chose May. She shook his head. I didn't choose between you and them, Alexandra. I chose the life that means something, and that's with Yofer. The first time in days, the heaviness in his chest lifted. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew this. He had walked away from Hollywood glamour and the dangerous shadows of his past, and what he carried now was worth more than both combined.